The door was still open. The room was silent, but the child who had been sleeping inside just minutes earlier was gone. No struggle, no sound, just absence. 3-year-old Madeleine McCann had vanished without a trace from a holiday apartment in Portugal while her parents dined just meters away. No broken locks, no forced entry, and no witnesses who could explain how a child disappeared in under 30 minutes. Within hours, the case would explode across the world, triggering one of the most controversial missing child investigations in history. But what truly happened that night would divide investigators, families, and the public for years to come. Because the biggest question wasn't just who took Madeleine, but whether the truth had been there all along. Welcome to Unimaginable True Crimes. Here, we expose the unimaginable, one case at a time. Before the headlines, before the investigations, Madeleine McCann was just a little girl on vacation with her family. The McCanns had traveled from the United Kingdom to Praia da Luz, a quiet seaside town known for its peaceful atmosphere. It was meant to be a simple holiday: sun, rest, and time away from the pressures of everyday life. Kate and Jerry McCann were both doctors, educated, methodical, and deeply devoted to their 3 young children. Friends described Madeleine as calm, affectionate, and unusually observant for her age. She had a distinctive feature, her right eye, marked by a rare condition that made her instantly recognizable. Each day followed a peaceful rhythm: breakfast, playtime, swimming, and evenings spent with friends. The group dined together most nights, taking turns checking on their sleeping children in nearby apartments. It was a system they trusted, routine, predictable, and seemingly safe. Nothing about the holiday suggested danger. Nothing hinted at what was about to unfold. But small details, overlooked at the time, would later become critical pieces of the puzzle. On May 3, 2007, the McCann family followed the same routine they had used all week. The children were put to bed early, leaving the adults free to dine at a nearby tapas restaurant. It was a short walk, close enough to return quickly, close enough to feel in control. At approximately 8:30 p.m., the group gathered at the restaurant, ordering food, talking casually, unaware they were entering the final normal moments of the trip. From their table, the apartments were partially visible, but not clearly enough to notice anything unusual. Every 30 minutes, one of the parents would leave to check on the children. It was routine, predictable, reassuring. At 9:05 p.m., Jerry McCann made his check. Everything appeared normal. The children were asleep, the room was quiet. Nothing seemed out of place. No noise, no movement, no indication that anything was wrong. He returned to the restaurant, unaware that this would be the last confirmed sighting of Madeleine that night. Minutes passed. Conversations continued. Plates were cleared. The atmosphere remained calm and ordinary. At 10:30 p.m., another check was planned, but something unexpected caused a delay. A conversation, a distraction, a minor interruption that would later feel impossibly significant. Time moved forward quietly, unnoticed, unremarkable, and dangerously unobserved. At 10 p.m., Kate McCann stood up to perform her check, just as she had done every night before. She walked the familiar path back to the apartment, unaware that everything had already changed. The door was not as she had left it. It was wider, slightly open. Inside, the apartment felt different, subtly disturbed, though nothing obvious was immediately visible. Kate moved quickly toward the bedroom, her pace shifting from routine to urgency. The twins were still asleep, peaceful, undisturbed. But Madeleine's bed was empty. For a moment, it didn't make sense. A pause, a refusal to process what she was seeing. Then, panic began to take hold, fast, overwhelming, impossible to contain. She ran back toward the restaurant. Her voice broke through the night. "Madeleine's gone!" The table fell silent. Confusion turned instantly into alarm. Within moments, the search began, but already precious time had been lost. And in those missing minutes, the case that would shock the world had already begun. Within minutes, the quiet holiday resort transformed into a frantic search zone as friends and staff rushed in every direction, calling Madeleine's name into the darkness. Doors were opened, nearby apartments checked, every possible hiding place searched, but there was no sign of her. The realization came quickly. This was no ordinary situation. Something was very wrong. At approximately 10:15 p.m., emergency services were contacted, marking the official beginning of the investigation. Local police arrived quickly, but from the very beginning, uncertainty clouded every decision. The apartment became the center of attention, treated both as a missing child case and a potential crime scene. Officers noted the open window, the unlocked door, and the absence of any clear signs of forced entry. To some, it suggested abduction. To others, it raised even more troubling questions. Search teams expanded outward. Streets, alleys, and nearby properties were combed in the dark. Volunteers joined in, forming lines and calling out, hoping for any response. But the night offered nothing back. No sound, no movement, no trace. As hours passed, the urgency deepened. The possibility of abduction became more real with every minute. Inside the apartment, officers began documenting everything, every object, every detail, every inconsistency. But the scene presented a paradox. Something had happened, yet nothing appeared disturbed. The timeline quickly became critical. Investigators needed to know exactly when Madeleine was last seen. Jerry McCann's 9:05 check would become the last confirmed sighting, but even that moment would later be questioned. Another witness claimed to have seen a man carrying a child near the apartment that night. The sighting was vague, but it introduced a chilling possibility. Madeleine may have been taken. Descriptions varied, timelines overlapped, and certainty remained just out of reach. By early morning, the search had intensified, but hope was already beginning to fade. The case quickly attracted international attention, turning a local disappearance into global news. Media crews arrived, cameras rolling, broadcasting every detail to millions around the world. The McCanns made public appeals, asking for any information that could bring their daughter home. Their words were calm, but beneath them, fear was unmistakable. As days passed, investigators pursued leads, but none brought them closer to Madeleine. Every possibility was considered: abduction, accident, or something far more complex. But with each passing day, the absence of evidence became the most disturbing clue of all. Search dogs were brought in, trained to detect scents that humans could not. Their reactions would later become one of the most controversial elements of the case. But at the time, investigators were still searching for anything, any sign that Madeleine was alive. The window of opportunity was closing, and the urgency was becoming desperation. Meanwhile, inconsistencies in statements began to surface, small details that didn't quite align. Investigators started asking harder questions about timelines, routines, and decisions made that night. And slowly, the focus of the investigation began to shift in an unexpected direction. What began as a search for an unknown suspect was becoming something far more complicated. Because in cases like this, sometimes the truth doesn't come from outside, but from within. And the next phase of the investigation would challenge everything people thought they understood. A case that once seemed straightforward was about to take a dramatic turn. One that would divide experts, authorities, and the public alike. Before we continue, if you've been following this story so far, please take one moment to support the channel. Like this video, turn on notifications, and subscribe to Unimaginable True Crimes. As the search for Madeleine intensified, investigators began reconstructing every minute of the night she disappeared. What initially seemed like a narrow window of time quickly expanded into a series of uncertainties. Witness statements were collected, but many conflicted in small, critical ways. Each contradiction introduced new doubt and new possibilities investigators couldn't ignore. The reported sighting of a man carrying a child became a central lead, but it lacked clarity. Descriptions varied: height, clothing, direction, nothing concrete enough to confirm identity. Still, investigators pursued it, hoping it might lead them to the person responsible. But as days passed, the lead began to weaken, fading into uncertainty. Attention then turned inward, toward the timeline provided by the parents and their friends. Every check, every movement, every minute was examined in detail. And it was here that subtle inconsistencies began to emerge. Small gaps, slight overlaps, moments that didn't quite align. Individually, they seemed insignificant, but together they raised serious questions. Investigators began re-interviewing witnesses, looking for clarity or contradictions. Some accounts shifted slightly under pressure, others remained firm. But the overall picture remained unclear, like a puzzle missing key pieces. Meanwhile, forensic teams returned to the apartment for deeper analysis. They searched for traces invisible to the naked eye, fibers, fingerprints, biological evidence. It was a meticulous process, slow, precise, and crucial. And then the search dogs were deployed again, this time with greater focus. These dogs were trained to detect specific scents, ones associated with human decomposition. When the dog signaled, it changed everything. The alert came from inside the apartment, near areas connected to the family. It was unexpected and deeply controversial because it suggested a possibility investigators hadn't publicly considered before, one that would soon place the family under an entirely different kind of scrutiny. The media quickly picked up on the development, fueling speculation across the world. Public opinion began to divide between those who believed in abduction and those who suspected something else. The investigation was no longer just about finding Madeleine, it had become a global debate. Behind the scenes, investigators continued to build their case, quietly, methodically. They revisited the timeline again, looking for the moment everything changed. And one question kept resurfacing. Was the timeline itself accurate? If even one detail was wrong, the entire case could shift. Then came another development, one that added even more complexity. A new suspect emerged, someone connected to the area, with a history investigators couldn't ignore. The focus shifted again, outward, then inward, then outward once more. It was becoming clear this case would not follow a simple path. Every answer seemed to create new questions, each more difficult than the last. And somewhere within all of it, the truth remained hidden. Investigators began mapping movements around the resort, who entered, who left, and who might have been watching. Phone records were examined, searching for unusual calls or suspicious patterns, but nothing immediately pointed to a clear suspect. Attention returned again to the apartment, the last confirmed location of Madeleine. Reconstruction teams attempted to recreate the timeline physically, step by step. Each movement was timed, each delay measured, and with each recreation, new questions surfaced. Could someone have entered and left unnoticed within that window? Or had something happened earlier before anyone realized? The uncertainty deepened, pushing investigators toward more difficult conclusions. Meanwhile, forensic analysis continued behind closed doors. Samples were tested repeatedly, each result scrutinized for accuracy. Some findings raised eyebrows, but none provided definitive answers. Still, the direction of the investigation was beginning to shift. Behind the scenes, discussions intensified about a controversial next step, a decision that could redefine the case and its public perception, because suspicion was beginning to turn in an unexpected direction, one that would soon place intense pressure on those closest to Madeleine. The media sensed the shift and quickly amplified it. Speculation grew louder, opinions became sharper, and the case moved further away from certainty. Investigators prepared to formalize their suspicions, a move that would send shockwaves through the investigation, because once taken, there would be no turning back. The case was about to reach its most controversial turning point. Kate and Jerry McCann were officially named as arguido, formal suspects under Portuguese law. The announcement stunned the public and reshaped the narrative overnight. What had been a search for an unknown abductor now carried a different implication. The parents denied any involvement, maintaining their innocence from the beginning, but suspicion, once introduced, proved impossible to ignore. The investigation had reached a point of no return. Every theory now carried weight and consequences, and the truth seemed further away than ever before. Because in trying to solve the mystery, the case had only grown deeper, and the next phase would uncover details no one was prepared for. Details that would challenge assumptions and redefine the investigation once again, because the evidence was about to take center stage, and with it, a new direction would emerge, one that would push the case towards its most revealing discoveries. But even then, certainty remained just out of reach, because the truth in this case was never simple and never where it seemed to be. With the case under intense scrutiny, investigators shifted focus toward forensic evidence, hoping science could reveal what witnesses could not. Items collected from the apartment were re-examined, this time with more advanced testing methods. Among the most discussed findings were traces detected by specially trained cadaver dogs. The alerts pointed to specific locations, areas closely associated with the family. It was a discovery that intensified suspicion, but also sparked immediate controversy, because dog alerts alone could not prove what had actually happened. Still, the findings pushed investigators to examine every detail with renewed urgency. Attention then turned to a rental car used by the family weeks after Madeleine disappeared. Forensic testing revealed traces that raised even more questions, but interpretation of those results proved far from straightforward. Some experts saw significance, others urged caution. The evidence was complex, and conclusions remained uncertain. Meanwhile, investigators continued exploring external suspects connected to the area. One name surfaced repeatedly, an individual with a troubling history near Praia da Luz, but linking that individual directly to Madeleine proved difficult. Investigators were now balancing multiple theories, none fully supported, none fully dismissed. The case had become a web of possibilities, each leading in a different direction. And at the center of it all remained one unanswered question: what really happened that night? Months passed and the investigation slowed, without the breakthrough everyone hoped for. Public attention remained intense, but progress behind the scenes had stalled. Eventually, the official investigation in Portugal was scaled back. The case was archived, though far from resolved. But for the McCann family, the search never stopped. They continued appeals, campaigns, and efforts to keep Madeleine's case alive. Years later, new information would begin to emerge. Authorities in other countries reopened lines of inquiry. Fresh leads pointed toward a potential suspect with a history of serious crimes. This individual had been in the region at the time of Madeleine's disappearance, and investigators believe he may have been connected to the case. The theory shifted once again, back toward the possibility of abduction, but proving that connection would require evidence that still remained out of reach. The case was reopened, bringing renewed attention and hope. Search efforts resumed, this time with more advanced tools and broader coordination. But even with new technology, the central mystery remained unsolved. Each new lead brought hope, but also the risk of disappointment. And the deeper investigators looked, the more complex the case became, because every answer seemed to open another unanswered question. And still, Madeleine's fate remained unknown. As the case reopened, investigators revisited old evidence, hoping that time and technology might reveal what had once been missed. Archived materials were reanalyzed using more advanced forensic techniques unavailable in 2007. Digital reconstruction tools were used to recreate the apartment and surrounding area in precise detail. Investigators simulated possible entry and exit routes, testing each theory against the timeline. Some scenarios seemed plausible, others quickly fell apart under scrutiny. But none could fully explain how Madeleine vanished without leaving a clear trace. Investigators expanded their search radius, revisiting locations previously overlooked. Ground-penetrating radar and new search methods were deployed across key areas. Each scan brought anticipation, but also the weight of uncertainty. Yet once again, no conclusive discovery was made. Attention returned to the suspect identified in later investigations. His past revealed patterns, movements, and behaviors that aligned with the timeline. Witnesses placed him in the region during the critical period, and certain details suggested he may have been watching the area beforehand. But linking him directly to Madeleine remained a challenge investigators could not overcome. Despite mounting suspicion, hard evidence was still missing, and without it, the case remained legally unresolved. Years of investigation had produced theories, but no definitive conclusion. Each new lead carried both hope and uncertainty in equal measure, and the deeper they looked, the more complex the case became, because every possibility seemed to open another unanswered question. Meanwhile, public interest never faded, keeping the case alive in global conversation. The story had become more than an investigation. It had become a mystery that refused to rest. And for the McCann family, the search remained deeply personal. Their determination never changed, despite the years that had passed. But answers remained elusive, just beyond reach. Investigators faced a difficult reality, the possibility that some truths may never be fully known. Yet the case continued to evolve, driven by new information and renewed effort. Each development brought them closer, but never close enough. And still, one question remained unanswered above all others. What truly happened to Madeleine McCann? A question that has persisted for years without resolution, and one that continues to drive the investigation forward. Because as long as the case remains open, the search continues, and with it, the hope that one day the truth will finally be revealed. Until then, the mystery remains, unresolved and deeply haunting. A case defined not just by what was found, but by what was missing, and by the silence that followed. Because sometimes the loudest clues are the ones that never appear, and in this case, silence spoke volumes. But the story was far from over, because the final truth had yet to be revealed. Years into the investigation, one reality had become clear. There was no single, uncontested version of what happened that night. Instead, the case existed as competing narratives, each supported by fragments of evidence, but none fully complete. One theory suggested a carefully timed abduction by someone familiar with the area. It relied on opportunity, an unlocked access point, predictable routines, and a narrow window of time. Supporters of this theory pointed to witness sightings and later suspect developments, but critics argued the timeline was too tight and the risk too high. Another theory focused inward, suggesting the possibility of an accidental event followed by concealment. This theory drew heavily from forensic alerts and inconsistencies in statements, but it too lacked definitive proof, relying on interpretation rather than certainty. Both theories carried weight, both raised difficult questions, and neither could fully explain every detail of the case. As investigators revisited the timeline, one thing stood out: the narrow window where everything could have happened. Between routine checks, minutes passed unnoticed, minutes that would define the entire case. In that gap, something occurred, something no one directly witnessed, and without a witness, the reconstruction would always remain incomplete. Investigators attempted to reconstruct the sequence step by step, second by second, but each reconstruction led to a different conclusion. Some pointed outward, others inward. None provided certainty. Over time, official positions shifted, reflecting the evolving nature of the evidence. Authorities in different countries pursued different leads, sometimes in parallel, sometimes in conflict, and with each shift, the truth seemed to move just out of reach. One suspect, identified years later, became the focus of renewed investigation. His background and location placed him within the scope of the case, but again, evidence linking him directly remained incomplete. The investigation had reached a difficult truth. There may never be a single clear answer. Instead, the case remained suspended between possibility and proof. For the Madeleine McCann family, the question was never theoretical. It was deeply personal. Their focus remained unchanged, finding out what happened to their daughter and ensuring that the search never stopped. Because in cases like this, closure is not guaranteed, only pursuit. And sometimes the truth exists but remains just beyond reach, hidden within fragments of evidence, waiting to be understood, or perhaps lost entirely, buried in time. In the end, the case of Madeleine McCann remains one of the most complex in modern history, defined not by what is known, but by what is missing, and by the questions that still remain unanswered, questions that continue to drive investigators forward, even after all these years. Because until the truth is known, the case is not over, and the final chapter has yet to be written. Years after that night in Praia da Luz, the case of Madeleine McCann remains officially unsolved. Investigations have reopened, shifted direction, and crossed international borders, but no definitive answer has emerged. Authorities continue to pursue leads, driven by the belief that the truth still exists somewhere. But with time, evidence fades, memories weaken, and possibilities narrow. For the McCann family, the loss has never been abstract. It has remained constant, personal, and unresolved. They have continued to search, to speak, and to hope, refusing to let Madeleine be forgotten. Their message has remained the same. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened, and that one piece of information could change everything. Over time, the case has become more than an investigation. It has become a global symbol, a symbol of unanswered questions and the limits of certainty. Because despite years of effort, one truth remains unchanged. No one can say with certainty what happened that night. And until that changes, the case remains open. But for those closest to Madeleine, closure may never truly come. Because justice in cases like this is not just about answers, but about understanding. And sometimes, understanding remains just out of reach, leaving behind only questions and the silence that follows. But the search continues, driven by hope and the belief that the truth matters. Because every unanswered case carries a story that deserves to be told. And for Madeleine McCann, that story is still unfinished. If this story held your attention, like the video, subscribe to Unimaginable True Crimes, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next investigation. Your support helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. In our next story, we uncover one of the most disturbing true crime cases ever recorded. How Joseph Fritzl hid a horrifying secret in plain sight for over 20 years in Amstetten, Austria. Behind the walls of an ordinary home, a hidden captivity went unnoticed for years, raising chilling questions about control, deception, and how such a crime could remain undiscovered for so long. This true crime documentary will explore the timeline, the hidden basement, the psychological manipulation, and the shocking moment the truth finally came to light.